Now we're going to go to his potential Treasury Secretary. And I was excited for this moment. Hope this doesn't trigger any, people from Wokeback Mountain. Is Elizabeth Warren not the biggest loser of the last 5 years? Elizabeth Warren, who sold her soul in 2016 and 2020, who sold her soul, who sold her progressive, if she ever was progressive, chops, because she was told you have more power if you're in the room than out of the room. She was told if you play the game from the inside, you'll get the change you want. She thought, so Elizabeth Warren, who sold her soul, sold Bernie out in 2016, wouldn't endorse him. Sold him out again in 2020, wouldn't endorse him. Wouldn't drop out of the race when it was clear she had absolutely no shot. Could you imagine if Elizabeth Warren would have dropped out after New Hampshire when she came in an embarrassing 4th place in New Hampshire? We might be having a very, very different conversation right now, because Bernie Sanders, if she had dropped out after New Hampshire, would have probably won a much larger margin in Nevada, where he blew out Biden, would have probably picked up some of her votes in South Carolina, and on Super Tuesday probably would have won a few more states that Warren's percentage took away from him and helped Biden win. So Warren did all this because for some strange reason, she was under the belief that if you play ball with the Joe Bidens of the world, if you play ball with the Hillary Clintons of the world, if you play ball with the neoliberal Democratic Party. Remember that New York Times story that during the primary this year, she was going around the country having hot tea with Democratic Party politicians, with big Democratic Party members, with potential superdelegates trying to get their support? She was told, and she believed, that if she plays ball, if she sells Bernie out, not once, but twice, not to mention she said nothing while Native Americans and environmental activists were getting their head shot at, grenades shot at them, tear gas, pepper spray, freezing water at Standing Rock. She was told, we'll throw you a bone. Maybe Treasury Secretary, maybe the Labor Department, something. We'll get you in that room, because she was told if you're inside the room, that's where the power is and she can make a difference. Well, I said all the way back then, Elizabeth Warren, there's a greater chance of me developing a 6-pack in the next 6 months than you becoming Treasury Secretary under Joe Biden. Frankly, I'm not even convinced she would get a parking pass in the White House under President Joe Biden, much less a cabinet position. Well, sorry to tell you, Elizabeth Warren, Biden is reportedly considering as his Treasury Secretary none other than Lael Brainard. Lael Brainard. If you've never heard that name, it's because most people don't know who she is. I'll give you a pretty quick rundown. When she worked in Bill Clinton's administration, she goes all the way back to working in Bill Clinton's administration. What was her top role? Executing NAFTA. She worked in Bill Clinton's Labor Department or under Bill Clinton. I don't know what her position was, but she was in an economic role for President Bill Clinton. She helped execute the disastrous NAFTA trade deal, which is part of the reason Trump won in 2016, because he was running on repealing NAFTA, even though he really didn't do that, and he just basically changed a few sentences in NAFTA and then pretended it was such a great deal. It's not. That's why Bernie voted against the new NAFTA. But what's amazing, she helped execute NAFTA under Bill Clinton. She also helped push for China, normal trade relations with China, that has destroyed hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of jobs in America. The American Prospect did a great piece on her. Let me read a little bit for you. One telling indicator of Bernard's non-populism is her stance on trade policy. where there is little evidence that she has strayed from her earlier orthodoxy. When she went to work for Clinton in 1997, two of her main assignments were implementing NAFTA and preparing the way for China's entry into the World Trade Organization, with few conditions other than granting access to investment banks such as Goldman Sachs. A quid pro quo demanded by Robert Rubin, who was Bill Clinton's Treasury Secretary, and another neoliberal hack that helped deregulate Wall Street, push NAFTA, repeal Glass-Steagall, and basically steal your money and give it to Wall Street bankers, and the former Goldman CEO who served as Clinton's Treasury Secretary. No other meaningful changes in China's entire mercantilist economic system were demanded or received. Bernard supported bilateral trade deals without serious labor rights. She expressed no concern about China's impact on American manufacturing or on jobs. Rather, Bernard saw outsourcing as a plus that resulted in cheaper consumer products. She shared the prevailing wishfulness about the impact of the trade deal on liberalization with China. The World Trade Organization accession will advance market-oriented economic reform. When you hear market-oriented economic reform, run. WTO accession will advance market-oriented economic reform, the rule of law, and economic freedom in China, she said in one speech. It will more deeply integrate China into a rules-based economic system, which in turn will increase its stake in peace and security. Yeah, how's that working out, China and the rules-based economic system, while they're ripping off intellectual property in America? As the director of Brookings Global Economic Program in the early 2000s, Bernard was a traditional globalist. She was a huge booster of the now defunct Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, which was substantially a corporate wish list presented as a trade liberalization deal that benefited the U.S. and somehow contained China. Bernard continued to be a strong defender of the WTO and the trade assumptions that underlie the WTO system. When she moved to Treasury under President Obama, one of her responsibilities was to review China's currency operations to determine whether Beijing should be branded a currency manipulator. She resisted all efforts to make such a finding. The policy of rejecting that approach came from higher-ups who naively hoped that a modus vivendi with China might be found. Bernard was not just a loyalist, but an enthusiast. When Congress toughened the law in 2015, after Bernard had left Treasury, to add grounds for citing and punishing Beijing's currency manipulation, some progressives in Congress joked that the legislation should be named the Lyall-Bernard Memorial Act. To dumb it down for you, this Lyall, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, so apologies if I'm not, Miss Brainard, helped push through NAFTA, helped push through normal trade relations with China, prevented naming China a currency manipulator, which is one of the few things I actually agree with Donald Trump on. And if she becomes Treasury Secretary, folks, it's going to happen regardless of her, because Biden wants it. It's not if the TPP comes back. It's when. It ain't if, it's when. President Joe Biden will enact the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Write it down, put it in your pipe, and smoke it. For those of you who work for a living, for those of you that have been hurt by NAFTA, by those of you that have been hurt by these free trade deals, labor leaders, including the AFL-CIO, has said that if the TPP ever came to pass, this is when they opposed it under Biden, it would be the final nail in American labor coffin. Let me say it again. The AFL-CIO, Richard Trumka, said in opposition to the TPP, if the TPP ever came to pass, it would be the final nail in the labor movement's coffin. And as I've been telling you for over a year, Joe Biden, he's not a union man. He's a fake union man. His whole career has hurt unions. He takes money from union busting companies. This is not a friend of American union. He's not a friend of labor. He's not a friend of the working man or woman. He's a corporate servant who just happens not to be Donald Trump. Frankly, I think if Joe Biden was running against Marco Rubio, I think he'd be losing. I think if Joe Biden was running against Mitt Romney, I think he'd be losing. I think if Joe Biden was running against, I don't know, Tom Cotton, God forbid, he'd be losing. I think if he was running against, I don't know, Nikki Haley, I think if he was running against almost any Republican, probably not Ted Cruz, I think he'd be losing. It's the same, it's Hillary Clinton 2016 in reverse, because I think anyone other than Hillary Clinton, I think, could have beat Trump. And I think pretty much anybody but Trump could be Biden. He's a terrible candidate. He's also a lucky candidate because he's been gifted by a psychopath president. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.